Hi guys, we are continuing with question 1 from our free response 3. Free response 3. Said that clearly. Okay. So part D. In order to finance the increase in government spending on national defense from part B, the government borrows funds from the public. So what's going to happen if the government starts borrowing? Well, that's going to crowd out, other borrowers, right? So that's one thing we know right away. So it's going to have a crowding out effect if they start borrowing money to finance their defense spending. So using a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market, show the effect of the government's borrowing on the real interest rate. Okay, so if the government borrows more money, that's going to increase the demand of money, right? So let's think about that. So let's come up here. So our demand curve is going to shift to the right, which is going to make money more expensive. And I should probably, let me just clone this guy right here and flip him, right? Because we're going to go up with this, right? Okay. All right. So now we want to. So that's already there. Okay. So our real interest rate is going to increase. So the real cost of money is going to increase because the government is going to be, borrowing money and demanding money, I should say. They're demanding money, so that's going to also increase the quantity of loanable funds being borrowed. So let's see, where are we here on this? So we want to make sure we say that, now, we want to make sure you show the rightward shift in the demand for money, in the money demand, and you want to make sure that you label your graph with the real interest rate on the vertical axis and the quantity of loanable funds on the horizontal axis. Now, what could also happen to drive the interest rates up, and you don't have to show this if you don't want to, but I want to make sure you understand that also what could happen is that because the government is pulling money out of the money supply to finance their defense spending, that could actually cause a shift in the supply curve to the left, which would also result, if you think about that, I actually had a guy. Where did he go? Let's use him. Okay. So that would also, I'm just going to, yeah. So we start off here, and we're going to move here, and we could potentially move up to here, right? So a rightward shift of the money demand or a leftward shift of money supply, both of those shifts would cause an increase in the real interest rate. Okay, so now if the real interest rate goes up, think about that. Then the next part of this, or the last part of this, I think, is we're being asked, what will this change or this increase in the real interest rate due to domestic investment? And that's what they're talking about here, mainly. I think probably exclusively a domestic investment, but it doesn't matter as long as you think about this in terms of when firms invest, they typically borrow the funds to invest. So if borrowing money becomes more expensive because the real interest rates are increasing, then firms are going to borrow less money for investment, for a capital investment, for expansion. So that is going to mean that real economic growth rate, or the rate of economic growth, is going to slow down. It's going to be reduced. And we can show that if we think about our formula, or our GDPY output equation, which I have right here. If we have less investment, this is a component of overall output or real GDP. If we have less investment because it's more expensive to borrow the money to invest, then we're going to have a reduced economic output. And you can show this if you want to, that will be helpful. But the most important thing is that you just explain that when there is a higher real interest rate, that means less firms are going to borrow the money to invest, because borrowing is more expensive. Because really, when you get a lot more into this, if you were to take a course in financial management, but when a firm is looking at expanding or taking on a new project, they're looking at the return or the expected return of the project versus what they call the cost of capital. Well, this real interest rate right here is the cost of capital. So for example, if you had a project that you thought was going to have a return of, say, 6% on what you invested in it, and the cost of capital was 4%, then that would be worth it, because because the cost would be less than the gain. However, if the real interest rate rose, causing the cost of capital to be, say, 9% or 8%, something over what the expected return on the project is or is going to be, then the firm would most likely decide not to invest, which would cause a drop right here in the overall investment in the economy, which would cause a drop in output. And we could call that, a reduction in the economic growth rate, or just when you think about a rate, it's really more of a slowing down of growth. So saying, instead of having a 1% or a 2% growth rate in the GDP in the next year, you might only have 0.8%, something like that, right? So it would slow down the growth, causing overall GDP or Y right here to actually be lower. Okay, it would be lower as a result. So I want you guys to sort of think about this, sort of the larger picture here, understanding that when the government makes a decision to spend more money, it certainly can initially drive up output. But then what would happen in the long run is that because of other factors, in this case, the fact that firms are going to invest less, that could drive the aggregate demand curve back to the left. Okay, but for the purposes of the problem, though, to make sure that if you're doing this on a real AP exam, you just want to make sure you answer the questions. So the investment would decrease, and you want to make sure you explain that it would decrease as a result of the higher real interest rate, right? And that would slow down or reduce the rate of economic growth, because I is part of the is a very important component of GDP. Let me go back to here, right? Okay, that takes care of question 1. On the next video, we will talk about question 2.